This episode of Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. Martini Coffee Roasters is not a martini-flavored coffee. In fact, it is a family-owned and operated company run by the Martini family. And while I'm sure they enjoy a good cocktail, they are all about that high-quality, smooth, flavorful coffee. Unlike many other roasters, Martini Coffee Roasters roast manually using a traditional method of roasting, most relying on sight and sound to ensure the best results, okay? This is quality, people. This is artisanal. This is handmade. This is what you're wanting. And not only that, but they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. So please support small businesses and check out Martini Coffee Roasters at martinicoffee.com. Once again, check out Martini Coffee Roasters at martinicoffee.com.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And this is Creep Street.
Yeah, it is, baby. Yeah, it is.
Real quick, up top, as we always do, let's start it off by telling you, please follow us on Instagram or
Check it
Facebook
out.
at Creep Street Podcast. We just broke 10,000 followers on Facebook.
Facebook, ever heard of it? Mark Zuckerberg, the Winklevoss twins earlier?
Follow us there and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod. Also, of course, we have a Patreon where you can get all sorts of goodies. And of course, I'm going to read off right now the names of our top tier Patreon subscribers.
Thank you, Dylan.
Of course, the Dream, James Watkins, the Finnish Face via Lundqvist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the Oh-So-Suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lash Schmetz, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, and the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer. Yes. If you too would like to get all sorts of bonus goodies, you just go to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast to figure it all out. See what it's all about.
See if it's for you.
But now I need to shut the up.
Oh my God, what is going on? Why are you so tense?
I need to shut my mouth.
Okay, you do. But you do.
We need to get right to it because today's a big one.
Today is a really, really big one. This is an episode that I believe that this has been our most requested episode ever.
Oh my God.
This guy that we're going to be talking about today, he is kind of known as like the Mac Daddy.
He's kind of the big guy. He's kind of the big guy on campus.
He kind of is. Here's the thing. Everyone is into him. He's kind of hot.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. There's something interesting about him, but this guy is known as many names, monikers, nom de plumes. But what we most know him as is H.H. Holmes. So, as I said, this episode has been suggested by so many people, and I tried to get everyone's names down, but if there's some people I didn't get, I'm so sorry, and some people's names I'm going to get, and then some people's Twitter...
Your Instagram, your handle. Yeah.
I'll say some people's names, and I'll say some people's handles. Well, thank you to Aoife Wilkins, Monster Movie Fan 1313, V Ben 1, Miss Amy 17, Kentishwiji, and Editaya Das. Thank you so much for suggesting this. And this guy is, of course, not someone that we're just doing because people are suggesting it.
No.
People are suggesting it because this is a classic. As I said, this is the Mac Daddy.
This is the Mac Daddy.
So let's talk about H.H. Holmes. Well, first of all, what's exciting is that this man is most known for his work. That's a bad way of putting it, but his work in Chicago, which is where we are right now.
Right.
So it just feels even more kind of right that
Right.
we're discussing this here in this place. It's a little bit spooky, especially because my family, the early ones that came over from Ireland, were living in the south side of Chicago at this time when this was happening. So it is like kind of scary. You're like, did this happen to a family member? So our story begins in the late 19th century in Chicago. Really, the whole world was changing so fast and so immensely and so excitingly during this time everywhere. But Chicago especially was a wild place.
Right.
It was booming in some ways. It was growing so fast, but it had this really dark, seedy underbelly to it as well. And it's just, it was one of the most exciting and dangerous places to be. And because of that, it drew so many people to go there. For the first time, really ever, single young women were migrating somewhere else on their own. In fact, Chicago icon Jane Addams herself was quoted as saying, "Never before in civilization have such numbers of young girls been suddenly released from the protection of the home and permitted to walk unattended upon the city streets and to work under alien roofs." So this was a time unlike any other.
Right.
But Chicago was interesting in a lot of its own ways, but just city life in general at this time, whether you were in Chicago, New York, London, anywhere, it was going to be kind of dangerous. 1,000 trains came into the city of Chicago every day, and 2 people a day were on average, and I quote, destroyed by trains.
Oh boy.
Like, what does that mean, destroyed? That is rough, but that's the
He was
word that was
pronounced
used.
wrecked at the scene by the doctor at 10:04 a.m.
But honestly, straight up, that's how bad it was. They were like, this man is destroyed. And not just that, not just people being destroyed, also, limbs being cut off, maimed, train cars falling from bridges, horses getting spooked and dragging carriages into huge crowds of people. I mean, just living in a city was dangerous. And that's not even including the diseases that were so prevalent. There was flu, typhoid, cholera, because of the poor water quality, really, is what it was. For example, in the first 6 months of 1892, there were over 800 violent deaths in Chicago, which comes out to be about 4 a day. Also, because of the use of coal and gas as a fuel source, the actual visibility in the city could oftentimes be very, very low. You couldn't really see sometimes further than just a block past you. Because of all of these reasons, Chicago was really like the perfect place to go to disappear, whether you meant to or not. And not long ago, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 took out nearly 18,000 buildings and left more than 100,000 people homeless.
Wow.
Because this had happened, the city had really come together and really revitalized the city. Chicago had been rebuilt bigger and better than ever. So there was this huge pride among Chicagoans of what they had, but it was kind of that in between where things were really going great, but still wasn't that long since the Chicago Fire. There was still a lot of rebuilding to do. And it was during this time that in August of 1886, a 26-year-old man, about 5'8", 155 pounds, with dark hair and beautiful blue eyes, named H.H. Holmes, arrived in Chicago and began to head to Englewood. Who was I describing? Some of you might have been thinking, I don't know, Zac Efron. But now that we've painted the scene of what Chicago was like, and what location is for our story today, I think we need to go back to the beginning. Let's talk about the beginnings of H.H. Holmes, baby. H.H. Holmes is actually not H.H. Holmes at all. His real name was actually Herman Webster Mudgett, so not as cute. And he was born on May 16th, 1861 in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. He had 2 siblings living with him along with his parents, and his parents were very, very strict Methodists. They ran a very tight ship. They were incredibly strict to the point where if someone misbehaved, they would be locked in the attic for a whole day with no food and not being allowed to speak.
Jesus Christ.
According to other people and Holmes himself, and even though I just said H.H. Holmes' name is not Holmes, it's Herman Webster Mudgett, he's most well known as Holmes, and he goes by Holmes for the most of the duration of what we're going to talk about. I'm just going to call him Holmes throughout this. He changes his name and uses different names very, very often.
Very often.
So as I was saying, according to other people and Holmes himself, Holmes was kind of a mama's boy, and he was very, very smart and bright, but he didn't really have a ton of friends. He liked to just be alone, be inside, and read Edgar Allan Poe. Almost like cliche.
Pretty fucking emo.
Almost like insulting to the reader.
Almost like, yeah.
If it was a novel, I'd be like, I get it, he's an emo kid, but it was really what happened.
Very
and
nice.
That's
okay.
what this story was like made to be made into a movie. You know what I mean? As it goes on, I'm just so excited for whenever this movie or series that is going to be made about him with Leonardo DiCaprio and Martin Scorsese. Who knows what is going on with that, but it'll be great when it does. As a kid, he had to walk by a doctor's office every single day on his way to school. And he was very afraid of the doctor, which really makes sense at this time because doctors, especially these kind of just like town doctors, it was really pretty amateur level still at the time. There wasn't really any sort of pain management or pain relief anywhere. It made sense that he was afraid of it, especially as a boy. But one day when he was about 5 years old, so he was pretty young, he had a very impactful experience that really stayed with him for the rest of his life. One day, two boys who knew his fear decided to take advantage of this and forced the young Holmes into the doctor's office and get face to face with the skeleton that was hanging in the doctor's office. We're going to get way more into this whole skeleton in the doctor's office idea later as the episode goes on. But at the time, these that were hanging in these offices, these were not made out of plastic or plaster. These weren't just used as a replica. These were actual human skeletons, often made out of bodies that were stolen from graves. So it makes sense that once again, this would scare the boy. But he got face to face with the skeleton, and it turns out he actually liked it.
It was a wicked and dangerous thing to do to a child of tender years and health, but it proved a heroic method of treatment, destined ultimately to cure me of my fears, and to inculcate in me, first, a strong feeling of curiosity, and later, a desire to learn, which resulted years afterwards in my adopting medicine as a profession.
Another defining moment for Holmes as a child was one day he was playing with one of his few friends, Tom. They were playing in an abandoned house, and Tom accidentally fell to his death.
Jeez, okay.
This is one of those things that is brought up that might be used to prove that he has always had this evil streak in him, that maybe he pushed his friend Tom, and that's how this began. But there's no proof of that happening. That absolutely could have happened, but I think it's more likely that he probably saw his friend fall and die, and maybe that had such a negative impact for him. Or maybe he already had some of these nefarious idealizations about death. When he saw his friend die and he was able to see a dead body that turned things more forward for him. Who knows what this event meant for him or how it affected his development. Who knows? But I do think that it must have had some sort of effect. And his childhood is also kind of hard to know too, because some people say he had boxes in his room full of normal keepsakes of a young boy, but then as well as like animal skulls from animals that he had found and killed and dissected. And that I'm not sure is actually true. That's another one of those things that could be true, that could not be true. But as he got a little bit older, he started dating a young girl named Clara Lovering. He wanted to have sex with her, and she said not until they got married. So you know what? God damn it. On Independence Day, 1878, they got married.
Wow.
And there you go. They got married, and they actually moved into the Mudgett family home. And she supported them while they were living at his parents' house, while Holmes spent a year apprenticing Dr. White, who was actually that same doctor of the doctor's office where he was forced into as a little boy to come face to face with that skeleton. Now he was an apprentice there. Yes.
And we're assuming something he doesn't get paid for, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so she is living at his parents' house and is supporting them financially, and they have a baby boy named Robert. Okay. So Clara is a saint, clearly, for doing all of this.
Okay.
Holmes also, this is just a side thing, but he calls Dr. White his best friend. I just think that's odd. Nothing else really to add to that. I just think it's weird.
Right.
Moving on. After the apprenticeship, Holmes goes to Vermont to start college, and he is living there alone without Clara and their daughter. And there he is flirting hardcore with all of these girls everywhere around him in Vermont. All of these maple syrup girls, these beautiful ladies.
Right.
So much so that his roommate came forward and said that Holmes asked him not to tell anyone that he was married. He was like, I don't want anyone to even know that I'm married. Very shady. While he was in Vermont, some other people living in the building were complaining about nasty, disgusting smell coming from his room.
Uh-oh.
Classic uh-oh. The landlady goes in there and there is a dead baby under his bed.
What?
Yeah, there is a dead baby under his bed. And she's like, what is this? And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm in med school. That's my homework.
Oh my God.
He said it was his homework.
Jesus Christ.
And the landlady was just like, that's fine. Don't let it happen again.
Holy shit. What?
That's the point when I threw my book at a wall. Because I thought, even in the 18 gosh darn hundreds, that can't be allowed. So, but this is the kind of thing that we'll see as time goes on, where he can really charm his way. He can talk his way out of anything.
That's the thing about this guy.
So he stays at the college in Vermont for about a year, and then transfers to the University of Michigan.
Yeah, that was something I didn't realize either.
Dylan's home state.
Yeah.
And the University of Michigan, its medical school was well known for being the top school for the very controversial art of dissection. Mm-hmm. At this time, that was still kind of... It was still kind of a touchy subject. It was still kind of a little scary for some people.
Taboo.
Taboo, yes. But the doctors knew. They were like, this is the most important thing that we have to do right now. We have to understand how the body works, not only just for our own research, but also for teaching people in med school. So that's why Holmes was attracted to the University of Michigan. So he transfers there, and Clara and their son Robert moved with him to Michigan for a little while until they moved back to New Hampshire with her parents. And Holmes would travel back and forth to New Hampshire to visit Clara and Robert. The visits would become more and more far apart until eventually he just stopped coming back.
Right.
But Clara and Holmes were never formally divorced. But back to his time in Michigan. As we said, he was drawn to the University of Michigan for this dissection program, which, as we said before, makes sense for anyone at the time wanting to be serious about becoming a doctor. But even his classmates were like, this guy's too into it. Even the other people cutting up the bodies were like, he likes it too much.
He had a knack for it.
Yeah, he was too good. He was too quick. You know that where someone's like, they answer too fast.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't just because of his creepiness that they didn't like him. They also didn't like him because they thought he was elitist and aloof and that he had absolutely no sense of humor at all. Which is different than what we kind of said before when he was able to talk his way out of having a dead baby under his bed.
That's interesting.
Sometimes people will talk about Holmes like he was the most charismatic person that has ever lived and was able to talk his way out of anything. And that clearly must have been true true. But a lot of people really didn't like him and got a really bad feeling about him.
That's interesting.
And it's almost like he could kind of flip it on and off, just depending on when he cared enough. That's kind of my impression of it. And here, he just didn't care enough to seem likable. He didn't care about that. He didn't care what they thought. So he graduated just barely from the University of Michigan in June 1884. And this is also kind of odd because not many serial killers really graduate from college, let alone med school.
Right.
Not because they're not smart enough. That's not at all. It's just that they don't necessarily have like the patience or the focus or the self-control to be able to do it.
Right.
But he's not the only one. And this is just one of the similarities I see between Holmes and Ted Bundy. This is going to come up again and again and again through it. Let us know what you guys think and if you think they're similar. But I mean, it is I think, very interesting. And it was with one of the classmates Holmes had from Michigan that he started a scam, a life insurance scam, one that he would go to again and again and again. The idea was he would get a life insurance policy out on someone. At the time, all you really needed to do was just produce a body. If the body was unrecognizable, you couldn't really ID it, they would take your word for it and you could get the payout. As I kind of mentioned before with the spooky, scary doctor, when Holmes was a child with that skeleton hanging, doctors were desperate for bodies.
Right.
Not just to make skeletons for doctors' offices, but also, like we said, for college, for teaching, and just for research in general. But there weren't enough people donating their bodies to science to meet up with the need.
Right.
So if you showed up at a doctor's office with a body, they weren't really going to ask many questions. They would even pay cash and they just wouldn't ask where the body came from.
Wow.
Doctors themselves oftentimes would engage in grave robbing as well. So Holmes was very aware of this, and it seems like he might have even engaged in doing this with Dr. White when he was apprenticing with him back in New Hampshire. So he wasn't afraid of this. He had no problem with bodies. He actually referred to bodies as, quote, material. He didn't have any kind of like human connection with this, not even emotional, just like even human physical connection, just calling it material.
Right.
He didn't have any problem with that. So doing this insurance scam where he had to get a body didn't bother him at all. Whether he killed the person or he found a body, he was okay with it.
So he's making money both legitimately and illegitimate.
Exactly, yes.
Which is kind of ironic in that way.
But they kind of serve each other too.
But they also serve each other.
Right.
Because one can't work without the other.
Right. So after Holmes graduated college, he worked all around the Midwest and even up in New York, as well as a teacher and a doctor, doing a bunch of different scams. And there's rumor that he might have killed a boy and then fled to Illinois. That also could have possibly have been his son, Robert, was with him, and then Robert disappeared, quote unquote.
Right.
It actually went back to New Hampshire.
Right.
That could have been a mistake. But people had thought that he might have murdered someone. He was someone that people could expect murder from in these places. There was a woman that he worked with at a school that he was a teacher at who said that she absolutely could see him murdering someone. So he was always kind of on the move until he finally arrived in Chicago. Holmes arrived in Englewood, which is on the south side of Chicago. At the time, now it's within the city limits. At the time, it was just on the cusp of the city, and it was just south of the city border. Holmes arrives and sees there is a drugstore called Holton's Drugstore at 63rd and Wallace. There is a story attached with the way that he bought this drugstore, maybe possibly killed one of the owners, the previous owner of the drugstore. That story actually hasn't been confirmed,
right.
So that one might not be totally true. So we're not gonna stick on that.
Sure.
But it is something that possibly could have happened. But he does buy Holton's drugstore and changes it to Holmes' drugstore. And once he bought the drugstore, lots of single women in their 20s started coming in and into that store trying to get a piece of that Holmes. Okay. He was different than all the other men that these girls had met. As we said, he was handsome. He had a beautiful, thick mustache.
You gotta understand, he wasn't like all the other men. He was handsome.
He was a good-looking guy, but it wasn't just that. It's also the way he acted with these girls. And like I said, these young women were coming from small towns where they hadn't experienced anything like this.
Right.
In the book Devil in the White City, the author Eric Larson writes, "He broke prevailing rules of casual intimacy. He stood too close, stared too long, touched too much and too long, and women adored him for it." So he was a little rough. He was a little dirty.
Hot damn.
He was kind of doing. He was pushing those boundaries, and the girls were liking it because they were from these small ass towns where no one had they knew everyone and everyone was their second cousin. I'm not being judgmental. This was the past. It literally was like that then.
I think I got a little weak in the knees there.
Yeah, you did, baby.
Yeah.
Look at you. You're blushing. And a man like this, of course, he didn't stay single for long. Wait a minute. Isn't he already married?
What? Yeah.
Not in Chicago.
Uh-oh.
No one in Chicago knew he was married, and Holmes didn't feel married. So he said, fuck it, and he got married to a woman named Murda on January 28th, 1887. They had met previously in Minnesota, which is where she was from, and Holmes did like her, for sure. At first, Murda liked all of the attention that Holmes was getting from other women coming in. She kind of liked it. But then after a while, it really started grating on her because she was working as a clerk in the pharmacy in the drugstore. But then Holmes started saying he needed her to be doing more bookkeeping up in the office upstairs. She was, up there alone all the time, knowing her husband was down there with all these...
flirting with the ladies.
Yeah. So she was very lonely and very sad.
Okay.
So in the summer of 1888, she actually moved into her parents' house. They had just moved to a suburb of Chicago called Wilmette, which is actually where I'm from.
That's right.
So she moves to Wilmette with her parents, and she has their baby, Lucy, there. However, Holmes does a really great job of playing the good husband and putting on the waterworks and telling her parents, how sorry he is, that how busy he's been and how he cares so much, and then he was giving so many gifts and making sure that Lucy and Murda were well taken care of for financially, that they just absolutely loved him. It made sense that his wife and kid would live in Wilmette and he would just live in the city. And they all thought that was just okay. And Murda's whole family liked him so much that Murda was quoted as saying, "His presence was like oil on troubled waters, as Mother often said to him. He was so kind, so gentle, and thoughtful that we forgot our cares and worries." So he would still come back and visit, and he would send money, but he was spending most of his time in Englewood. And soon after that, he buys the empty lot across from his pharmacy, and he starts sketching. He doesn't use an architect.
Okay.
He does all of the sketching himself. He doesn't want anyone besides him to know the full blueprints of this place.
What the hell is he building?
It was a murder castle.
Oh.
It was a murder castle, which you hate to hear.
Oh, God.
But that is what he did. And it was a very, very confusing build, to say the least. He didn't have anyone work on the whole project the whole time. He would bring in a crew to build a part of a wall, and then he would fire all of them, bring in a different crew to install the windows, fire them, so just to make sure that no one knew what really was going on. And also it was a way for him to not have to pay the workers because he could say, hey, you didn't do what I asked. I'm not paying you for this.
Right.
When really they're like, we don't really understand what you're asking us to do. This doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So some of the things that people were doing could seem very normal, very mundane. For example, putting in piping or installing a furnace or any sort of thing like that. One person comes in thinking they're just putting up walls. One person comes in just thinking they're putting up sheet metal. They don't really know what they're doing. Next thing you know, you've built a room that's essentially an oven. And no one is really the wiser. No one is going to tip off what's going on because no one's really aware of what they're building. Like I said, he wasn't really paying many people for this labor that he was doing.
Right.
Also, the World's Fair was going to be happening in Chicago. The World's Fair was going to be this huge celebration of the 400th anniversary of Columbus landing in the Americas.
Right.
And a few years before, France had a World's Fair. And at that World's Fair is where they introduced the Eiffel Tower.
Right.
And everyone loved it. Everyone was obsessed with this dang tower. And the Americans at that World's Fair in Paris, they kind of like half-assed it.
Right.
So
felt like chumps.
Exactly. After they saw the Eiffel Tower, they were like, we really
look like chumps.
We beefed this. We're chumps and we need to be champs. So you know what happened? The city with broad shoulders got in there and they got by, against all odds, the underdogs, the blue collar workers.
Ooh.
They got it. Chicago got the World's Fair. So people now, this is a few years off from when the fair is going to be happening, but people are already coming in because of the work that the fair is going to be bringing to the whole city.
It's almost like when a city gets the Olympics.
It's like right. So many people came to work, but the problem was everyone had that idea. So there was a lot of people looking for work. So he was able to get new people coming in every day that didn't know the wiser that they weren't going to get paid at the end of the day for their work. H.H. Holmes was a grade A dickhead. Grade A dickhead.
Right.
Just through and through. Like he had the money to pay.
Right.
At least some of the time, and just to be a dick. But he ends up creating this huge building that is known in the neighborhood as the Castle, because there's nothing like it in the neighborhood. The first floor had 5 retail spaces where he would be able to gain income from. The second floor was a little bit more confusing. It had 6 corridors, 35 rooms, 51 doors, and the third floor had 3 dozen rooms. Especially the second floor, it had lots of twists and turns, doors opening to nowhere, stairs leading up to nowhere, and lots of weird, different shaped rooms, and we'll kind of get more into that a little bit later.
Okay.
Now, around this same time, Jack the Ripper was going about his spree in London.
Oh, yeah.
And people were getting the news of it back here in America. And they were like, oh my God, that's insane.
Right.
Nothing like that could ever happen here.
Holy shit.
And H.H. Holmes said, I'm coming. And he continues on and he moves his pharmacy into his new building. But before he does that, he sells his pharmacy to a new owner and doesn't tell him that he's going to open his pharmacy back up across the street. So he sells his pharmacy to someone else saying there won't be any competition, don't worry. And then he opens his business back up across the street in one of the storefronts in his castle. Once again, grade A ass foolery.
Yeah.
Just like true dickheadedness. And once he moved into the castle, he only bought more and more things on credit. You would think that would cause more issues for him, but for some reason he was like Teflon. It just always was okay. He had an employee named C.E. Davis who estimated that he had about $200,000 at the time. He said,
"He was the smoothest man I ever saw. Creditors would come here raging and calling him all the names imaginable, and he would smile and talk to them and set up the cigars and drinks and send them away seemingly as friends for life. I never saw him angry. You couldn't have troubled him if you tried. C.E. Davis."
But the thing is, he wasn't always so smooth as we know about Holmes. we know that he's a little bit more finicky. We know that he doesn't, that some people can kind of pick up on his bullshit. Some people can smell it. And Holmes went to a druggist named Erickson to buy chloroform very, very often. He would go there sometimes 9 or 10 times a week.
Whoa.
And he would buy it in bulk. Erickson always would ask him what he was doing with all this chloroform, and he never really gave a firm answer until Erickson finally said, I'm not going to sell this to you unless you tell me what you're doing.
Right.
And Holmes said that he was using the chloroform for scientific experiments. That was enough for Erickson, so he sold him the chloroform.
I like that he was so troubled that he said, you know what?
What is it?
You know what, Mr. Holmes? I will forego payment unless you tell me what you're using this for.
Experiments?
Okay, there you go. Checks out.
All right, have a good
one,
day.
Holmes.
Thanks,
See you next
man.
Tuesday.
All right, be well. Yeah, it's crazy. The next time he comes back in, he comes in, asks for chloroform. Erickson asks how the experiments are going. Holmes just kind of looks at him with a blank stare and asks what he's talking about. He says he hasn't been doing any experiments. Like, what?
And then he probably thought, they're top secret experiments. So he's kind of saying mum's the word. It's a wink in his eye. He's going, what experiments, wink?
Oh, I hope I'm invited to the beautiful Blue Eye Club.
Okay, this checks out again. Okay, here's more chloroform.
Here we go. And that story is wild to me for many reasons. One, it's weird that Holmes would be that sloppy to forget. I think it's because he just didn't fucking care about this guy. He didn't even think anything about him. And he didn't think anything about the lie that he told to him, that he just forgot that he said he was doing experiments. But at the same time, it's like, how do you make that mistake? Like, especially because he said something just so stupid like scientist or scientific experiments.
Right.
It's not like you even had to like remember a specific experiment or some sort of complicated story. Right. You know, it's just, it's weird. And as I was saying about the World's Fair before, the castle was right on 63rd Street, which was just a few miles away from where the World's Fair was going to be. Mm-hmm. So Holmes was very excited about this and decided to have a hotel in his castle as a way to make some extra money and take advantage of this opportunity. Or was it maybe for, able to get some lone women coming from the fair? So his plan was he was going to use the castle during the fair, and then afterwards he would burn the building for the insurance money and also to get rid of any sort of material there. And all the time he would be chatting up cops whenever they would come by. He would give them cigars, meals, but he really wanted them on his good side so that they wouldn't suspect him, even if they did know about anything. They didn't know about anything that was going to go on or was going on, but he was just wanted to get ahead of it. And he was really good at doing this, kind of the whining and dining, kind of swindling you, getting you under his wing without you even kind of realizing you're doing it. And it was in early 1891, Holmes hired a man named Ned Connor to be the jewelry counter manager at his drugstore. And his wife, Julia, and their daughter, Pearl, would be joining Ned Connors in living in the castle as well. It wasn't long before Julia started working as a clerk and a bookkeeper for Holmes as well. And then, not long after that, Holmes hired Julia's 19-year-old sister, Gertie, to work for him too. Now, Holmes was very openly flirtatious with both Gertie and Julia, and they reciprocated pretty obviously as well, to the point where sometimes people at the store would give Ned kind of pitiful glances because they would feel bad. They'd be like, wow, Holmes is literally like chatting up your wife and your sister-in-law at the same time in front of you. And you are at a jewelry counter in a drugstore? But one day, Gertie was very, very upset and said she wouldn't spend another second in Chicago and she needed to go back home immediately. She wouldn't look at Holmes and she wouldn't speak to him, and she went right back to Iowa that day. We don't know exactly what happened because she actually died suddenly not long after she got home to Iowa.
Was it, I'm assuming, just a coincidence?
It is a very strange coincidence. It was not because of Holmes, but it seems like something did happen between her and Holmes, and that is why she left so quickly.
God. And how freaky is that?
Yeah.
That she's still just of whatever other cause. Right. Does it say what? Was it an illness?
It just said like mysterious, sudden. Yeah.
That is bizarre.
Isn't that so scary? There are stuff that we're going to get to later that kind of touches on the fact that H.H. Holmes, I think, is real evil.
Right.
You know what I mean? Not just he was a bad person morally. It seems like there's a tangible evil around him that kind of like what you were saying, like a cancer spreads throughout the people that he is around.
Yeah.
And
he's a cancer.
He really is
a cancer. Not just in the lethal sense, like he kills people, but financially,
he
sucks the joy out of everything. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, charm you.
That's the thing. He's so good at it, you sometimes don't even realize that it might be happening. And that's something that really sticks out to me with Holmes, is that he really reminds me of a cult leader. He reminds me in some ways more of a cult leader than he does a serial killer. And of course he is a serial killer. I'm not saying he's not a serial killer, but he has so many of these characteristics of a cult leader where he's kind of able to hypnotize you, convince you to do things you wouldn't otherwise be doing, and has a way to really change the way that you see yourself. That will come up again and again, and I'll point that out as well. And let me know where you see that, or if you see that, as this story goes on. But back in Chicago, Holmes sells Ned Connor his pharmacy, which Ned Connor thinks is a great idea. But it turns out Holmes is doing it just to be a dick, because he sells over a pharmacy that is wildly in debt. And now Ned is responsible and under the ownership of all of that debt. And Holmes is just kind of saying, sorry, all sales are final. It's done. And Ned tries to stick with it for a while, but after he finds out about what's going on between Julia and Holmes, he says, you need to stop. She essentially says no, and he abandons his interest in the company, and he leaves, and Julia and Ned separate. But the problem is, once Ned is out of the picture, Holmes kind of starts cooling on Julia. It's not as exciting anymore.
Grass ain't so green.
Exactly. Julia also has a daughter named Pearl, which he finds weird. Not that her name is Pearl, he just finds her weird, is what I meant to say.
I would have loved that if he just didn't like the name Pearl.
I said it in a weird way. I think he was fine with her name. He didn't like that she was kind of a weirdo. Apparently she was real dark and somber and solemn and just kind of this very scary 6-year-old. And he didn't like that. But also, she was probably going through some shit. Eventually, Julia gets pregnant. And because Julia gets pregnant, she says, okay, Holmes, meaning his name, not calling you Holmes.
Right.
I'm pregnant. We got to get married now. He keeps saying we're going to get married and you never do it. But I'm pregnant. Now we got to get married. And he's like, okay, we can get married, but only if you let me. And this is actually what happened. Only if you let me give you an abortion on Christmas Eve.
Reasonable.
And for some reason, she says that's fine.
Wow. I was, of course, kidding.
No, she said that's fine. However, neither Julia nor Pearl were ever seen again. Holmes said that Julia and Pearl actually just went to Davenport, Iowa for a wedding, and they went there earlier than they had expected. There was a family wedding in Davenport, Iowa, but Julia and Pearl didn't show up to the wedding. It was around this time that Holmes started working with a man named Charles Chappell. And Charles Chappell was an articulator. That means that he was able to take a body and remove all of the flesh completely down to the bone, and then he could put the bones back together to create a skeleton. Like we were talking about before, when you sell it to the doctor's offices or hospitals or what have you. But it wasn't just Holmes that was getting in this murderous spirit. The Chicago Tribune reported 5,906 murders in the U.S. in 1891, which was almost a 40% increase from 1890, just the 1 year previous.
Wow.
So murders were definitely on the rise. And this is part of the reason why Holmes was able to go under the radar. It was so hard to be able to follow up on all of these crimes, follow up on all of these missing people, especially with the resources that they had at the time. So even though Julia and Pearl were never seen again, it seems like later on some child's bones would be found on the premises that matched the age of Pearl, and it seems as though Julia's skeleton was sold. But now that she's a skeleton, Holmes needs a new girlfriend, and it's Emmeline Cigrand. She began working at the pharmacy in May 1892, and she absolutely loved Holmes. Holmes said that he was the son of an English lord, and when he proposed to her, he said that they would travel through Europe on their honeymoon and meet his father.
Okay.
This English lord. And poor Emmeline was really in love. She really was into this. However, as time went on, she started to kind of cool on him and maybe want to start heading home.
Probably started to smell the bullshit.
Exactly. It's not exactly clear what happened. We think that maybe she found out about this credit scheme, or he might have owed her as much as $800. I do not believe she wasn't on his tail about the violence or the murder necessarily, but she knew about some of his other schemes and did not like that. However, shortly after she told a neighbor that she was thinking of leaving, she was never seen again. When the neighbor asked Holmes where she was, Holmes said that she had gotten married. Which the neighbor thought was very weird because Emmeline hadn't told her that, and she didn't think that was like her to not tell her this. This neighbor had a really bad feeling, and she really thought she had a pretty good feeling that Holmes killed Emmeline, but she never called the police or even moved out. People just really did not have faith in any sort of justice happening, and she didn't really have any way of proving it, so she didn't really know what to do. And most likely, Emmeline's skeleton was sold to a hospital.
So is it possible that there are skeletons that were made by H.H. Holmes out in the wild?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I don't know if these specific people were ever recovered. I don't know if anyone ever has. I don't know how that has worked, but I mean, in theory, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But even though there wasn't a lot of faith in the police departments, that doesn't mean that these missing people weren't sought after at all. Private investigators started coming around to the castle asking about different missing girls. And they weren't coming around to talk to Holmes as a suspect. They didn't think of that at all. They just were asking questions and wanting to know if he had any more information. So even though he was not worried about this, he knew that they were never going to figure this out. This was kind of a hint that his time in Chicago was starting to end. But it was in March of 1893 that Minnie R. Williams, who was a woman that he had known before and kind of led on before, she moved to Chicago and she became Holmes's secretary. She was actually very, very wealthy and owned a large piece of property in Fort Worth, Texas. And thankfully for Holmes, she was obsessed with him.
Was she a widow, or was she young, or what?
She inherited the money from her uncle. She moved to Chicago not to be with him, but they reconnected when she arrived in Chicago, and she's just madly in love and you know, so happy. Finally, he proposes to her, and Minnie is very excited, but she has a sister, Nanny. Kind of a fun situation, Minnie and Nanny, but Nanny wasn't so sure about this proposal. She knew that Minnie was, I hate to say it, but she knew she wasn't a 10. Okay. But she knew Minnie had that money, so she was like, I'm a little suspicious about this situation. So Holmes was like, don't worry about it. Listen, invite Nanny to come to Chicago to the World's Fair on my dime. Stay with us. It'll be great. So Nanny accepts this gracious invitation and comes to Chicago. At first, she's really unsure. She arrives ready to not like Holmes, ready to be unsure, but she is completely won over and thinks he is just the greatest guy.
Wow, okay.
He takes Nanny and Minnie to the World's Fair every single day for 2 weeks straight. He really shows them a great time, and not only that, but Holmes then says he's going to take Nanny to Germany for art school. Nanny writes home. She's very excited about this. But however, she was never seen again. And not long after, he gave his right-hand man, Ben Peitzel, he gave his wife clothes from his quote-unquote cousin, Minnie Williams, and he gave his right-hand man, Ben, a trunk with the initials MRW on it. And so it seems as though he has killed 2 more people. Now, these are people that we're pretty positive he did. Even if we don't have concrete evidence, we can be pretty sure. There are, of course, a lot more people that he could have killed that we will never know about.
Right.
That's absolutely possible. This man could have been out there at the fair looking for women, bringing them back home, or just having different clerks that worked with him.
Right.
Oftentimes, these young women would get jobs, never be heard from again.
Right.
Even though there's only a few that we know of for sure, it's possible that he has killed many people. But he didn't just kill in any way. He had a very specific style.
Holmes did not kill face to face, as Jack the Ripper had done, gorging himself on warmth and viscera, but he did like proximity. He liked being near enough to hear the approach of death and the rising panic of his victims. This was when his quest for possession entered its most satisfying phase. The vault deadened most of the cries and pounding, but not all. When the hotel was full of guests, he settled for more silent means. He filled a room with gas and let the guest expire in her sleep. Or he crept in with a passkey and pressed a chloroform-soaked rag to her face. The choice was his, a measure of his power. No matter what the approach, the act always left him in possession of a fresh supply of material, which he could then explore at will. The possession he craved was a transient thing, like the scent of a fresh-cut hyacinth. Once it was gone, only another acquisition could restore it.
And the end of that quote there really explains this informal rule he had where he didn't have any trophies, really, which is different than other serial killers. And that's what we were saying with where the possession he craved was a transient thing. Having a trophy of it wasn't enough.
Right.
He needed to actually have the kill again.
Right.
And this is where I'm unsure myself as to his motives. Some people think his motives were purely just out of necessity for his business. Like his main priority was making as much money as he can through these credit schemes or through these insurance scams.
Right.
And that whoever got in his way of that, that's who he would kill, and that's just he had no problem killing. However, I think that does not explain the fact that he's killing a lot of people that he allows to get close to him. Right. And it just seems like a huge hassle to go with all of this trouble to make this extremely complicated house some people think he did that really just to be hiding these goods that he bought on credit until he could sell them. I'm sure he did that, but that just seems like a lot of trouble to make this whole building like this, as well as with this dungeon that we're gonna get to later. Another thought is that a part of his motivation is sexual, that he would watch these people as they were suffocating from the gas or just from the lack of oxygen or however they were dying, and he would masturbate while listening to them dying or watching them dying. However, I haven't found any for real sources that I have found to be very cut and dry about this.
Right.
Like, I feel like it's kind of alluded to, but it's never formally really said in a lot of these sources. So a lot of times it's said that he's aroused, but I don't know. Right. So let me know what you guys think. Let us know what you guys think about this. But then there's also the fact that he just I think enjoys being able to control people and what he can get people to do and how much he can kind of keep people wrapped around his little finger. Can I convince this person to walk into this dark room and then saying that there's something in there that I need them to get, and then I close the door, it's an airtight door, and they suffocate in there, and I can listen to them pound. I think he's got to get some kind of high off of that. I don't think it's just for the sake of getting rid of someone, and I don't think it's just for the sake of having material to cut up. I think that's definitely part of it, but if he just wanted material, why doesn't he go out and kill some random person. I don't know if he was aware that his life was going to be short, because I think a lot of times serial killers do understand that live fast, die young type thing. But I kind of think that he thought he was going to get away with this for a long time. Yeah. I don't think he thought he was going to get caught. I think he just wanted to be able to control people for as long as he could, I guess. And speaking of controlling people, he got another lady friend.
Uh-oh.
Her name was Georgiana Yoke. They met at a department store she worked at, and shortly thereafter he proposed at the World's Fair. It actually sounded really romantic, I'll give him that. God bless him. Georgiana, just like many of the other women in his life, absolutely adored Holmes. She thought that he was a rich man that inherited a lot of land in Texas.
Right.
I forgot to mention this before Minnie disappeared or was died and turned into a skeleton.
Right.
Holmes convinced her to sign over the land to him.
That is so bizarre.
So now he had the land in Texas, which he knew he needed to do because he knew that they weren't married. He knew because he was still technically married to Claire Lovering, so his marriage to Minnie was not real, so he would not actually get her assets. But once he's with Georgiana, he realizes that it's really kind of time to wrap up his time in Chicago. So he sets a fire to the 3rd floor of his castle, but the insurance company is a little suspicious of what is going on, and they're making it a little bit harder for him to get his money because he has a bunch of different aliases with fake names. It makes it all very confusing for himself, honestly. Eventually, he is tricked into a meeting with a bunch of his creditors and their lawyers and a cop. And they're all in there, they're confronting him, and they're saying that he owes them at least $50,000.
Wow.
And that's in that money.
Yeah, you got to think in 90s.
So yeah, that's about $1.5 million.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
He's run up a bill.
You run up a big old bill, but he gives them a tearful apology, as he always does. He said that his ambition got in the way of his ability to pay his debts, and that the panic of 1893, a fucked up economic time, that's all we really need to know for this podcast, really negatively affect him. And actually a lot of people in the room were very sympathetic, and they believed this. He told them that he could pay them back by giving them mortgages secured by his various properties. This was laughable to the people. They were like, you owe us so much money, and they were just like, that's not going to happen.
Right.
So they asked him to wait out in the hall while they discussed what they wanted to do. When one of the men in the office came out supposedly to get a drink of water, he told Holmes that all of them in there were leaning towards arresting him, and he bolts. He leaves with his right-hand man, Ben Peitzel, and Georgiana Yoke to Fort Worth, Texas. They also go to Colorado, where they pick up some insurance money from Minnie's brother.
Damn. So they're on the run.
Yeah. Him and Georgiana get quote-unquote married.
Okay.
But going back to his right-hand man, Peitzel, for a second.
Yeah.
I haven't really talked about him in detail too much, but he really is going to be a main important character for the rest of this story. Ben Peitzel was very much aware and in the know of all of what Holmes was doing in terms of these insurance scams, and as well as his credit scams as well. Holmes comes up with a plan to fake Ben Peitzel's death to get the insurance money on Ben Peitzel. And for some reason, Ben agreed to this.
Right.
Ben never thought that he would actually be the victim of one of these crimes. Keep that in your mind.
Okay.
But for now, they return to Fort Worth, Texas, and believe it or not, they begin to build another murder castle.
Jesus God.
On this plot of land that they had, that he essentially stole from Minnie Williams.
Damn. It's like a Hilton chain or
It
something.
kind of is. And this second Hilton was twice the size of the castle in Englewood. And while he was there, he was doing the same thing that he was doing before with buying items on credit and selling those items before paying the creditors. But unfortunately, he did that with a horse in Texas. People do not mess with their horses in Texas. You can't do it then. You can't do it now.
Man.
Don't fuck with horses. Don't steal a horse. And that might have been his downfall. Well, once again, keep that in the back of your mind. So after that, after he does some bad horse decision making. He goes on and he does some other, he tries to open another pharmacy. He does it literally the exact same thing he's doing in Chicago. It's like if you get a second chance at life.
Yeah.
Why don't you just do another thing?
Yeah.
Not even you have a chance to be clean. I know that's not your interest. Why don't you just try to do something that's more fun or improve, or even just improve on your past mistakes?
Right.
That's what's weird. It's not even that it's just boring. It's he's so narcissistic he can't even accept the fact there are things for him to improve upon.
Right.
But at the same time, he was doing very well.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But through this business he had with the pharmacy and selling those items on credit at the pharmacy, he ends up going to jail. And when he's in jail, he ends up sharing a cell with a very notorious bandit named Maureen and Dylan. And Holmes is a fan.
That's right. He was a train robber or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's old school, outlaw.
Right.
Holmes is very excited about this idea. He's oh my gosh, I got Hedgepeth here. And he tells him his whole plan about this insurance scam with his right-hand man, Ben. But he tells him the whole story about how he's going to kill Ben and make it seem like an accident and take all of the money. Hedgepeth himself said he didn't want to become involved with Holmes at all because he felt like he could be his next victim. However, Hedgepeth did give Holmes the name of a crooked lawyer who could help him out possibly. And Holmes said that he would send him $500 once he got the payout from the insurance. Then Georgiana bails Holmes out of jail, and Holmes and Ben head to Philadelphia to pull off their scam. Ben's wife, Carrie Peitzel, was begging him not to do this. She really didn't want him to do this, but he said that it was too good of an opportunity to pass up and that it wasn't a big deal anyway. He was going to be fine. They're just faking his death. They're going to have lots of money. It's going to be great.
Oh, yeah.
However, as we know, Holmes actually killed Ben Peitzel. He probably chloroformed him to death, just chloroformed him until he passed out and just held it over his face until he died. We know this because apparently during his autopsy, his lungs just openly smelled of chloroform. But Holmes put a pipe, a bottle, and a match by Ben's body so it would look like an accidental explosion. So Holmes then tells Carrie, who at this point, this Carrie, Ben Peitzel's wife, she still thinks that Ben is alive. She thinks that they just faked his death and Ben is somewhere in hiding. So Holmes tells Carrie and the whole family that they need to do exactly what he says, or else they will mess up this whole thing and their dad or their husband may die or go to jail, and then what was this all for? Right. It was all for nothing. He needs someone to go identify the body with him, and Carrie Peitzel is too sick to go. Her oldest daughter needs to take care of the mother, and the youngest baby, the infant, who is also sick. So the second oldest, Alice, who is 15 years old, has to go and identify this body. Keep in mind, she does not think she is identifying her father's body. Unfortunately, it actually is her father's body. So they go, they identify, and then Holmes convinces Carrie to let Holmes bring Nellie, who was 11 years old, and Howard, 8 years old, with him, and her daughter Alice, 15 years old, who is already with him, to go find their dad in hiding. Somehow, Carrie agrees to this, and the three children accompany Holmes on this tour across the Midwest, basically. They go to Indianapolis, they go to Cincinnati, they go to Detroit. They're kind of going all over on this wild goose chase. And at the same time, Holmes is sending around Carrie and her oldest and youngest, her two children that are with her. He's sending them around as well. And Holmes is also sending around Georgiana Yoke, his wife. They're all traveling to these different cities separately, but together.
And they don't even know it.
None of them know that they're with each other. None of them know that they're all in the same city. In fact, the kids are all very homesick, asking for their mother, writing letters for their mother, which Holmes never sends. Little do they know that she could just be a few blocks away.
Wow.
And this is another sign that I think he just likes having information that people don't know and being able to manipulate and just being able to be like a puppet master.
Right.
That's what he really, really wanted, I think, in my opinion. Finally, he takes them all up to Toronto. When they're in Toronto, Holmes tells Carrie that she absolutely cannot leave her hotel because people could be out following them. They're still not in the clear yet, but Carrie needs to pick up some things at the department store for the baby, so she has to go out. And when she's right outside the department store, and she runs into Holmes. He actually reacts very calmly, and he tells her to wait there for him and that he'll be right back. After a little while, he doesn't return, so she just goes back to her hotel.
Right.
It turns out inside the department store were Carrie's 2 girls that were with Holmes. They actually were in the department store at the same time and didn't run into each other.
That's incredible.
Holmes just told her... Heartbreaking. It's so sad. This whole thing, they could have caught him in the act of this. When he told her to wait for him, he got the girls and he had them leave through a different exit. Then on November 17th, none other than Pinkerton Security, that might sound familiar from our Jennifer Moray episode.
I think that was episode 28?
Yes. Yeah. So Pinkerton Security, around in the 90s, around in the 1890s.
Yeah.
They catch Holmes in Boston, like I said, on November 17th. Pinkerton was after him for different insurance frauds as well as that issue with the horse.
Right.
The people were not into this horse situation. And so he was like, oh, that's why I'm in jail? You're sending me to jail? Like, oh, that's okay.
Right.
So he goes to prison in Philadelphia where he is a model prisoner and he gets lots of special treatment because the guards really like him. He was allowed to wear his own clothes. He could keep some of his own belongings and he was allowed to buy food, newspapers, and magazines. And he had a big cell to himself. He really got very, very special treatment. So while he was in jail, the 3 Peitzel children that Holmes was traveling around the Midwest with are now missing. You probably assumed was going to happen.
Right.
This was just such a crazy case for the public at the time because no one could even fathom that someone would kill 3 kids.
Right.
This was a very different time before 24-hour news, before, people didn't really even know about serial killers yet.
Right.
So this was a huge, huge case, and Frank Geiger, the detective who was assigned to this case, really became a celebrity and was kind of seen as like the American Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
But he was like very chill about it. He was like, I want to still like get to work. This is another thing where it's like made for a movie. He had just recently lost his wife and his daughter. So he's like going through his own personal trauma and like trying to help out another family that have lost a parent and a child.
Right.
It really just, it lines up. But through some truly, incredible police work, I will say. He first found the bodies of the 2 Peitzel girls in Toronto. He heard from a man in Toronto that said that he believed that Holmes rented the house next to him in October of 1894. He noticed that there was only an old mattress, a bed, and an unusually large trunk that were brought into the house. Later, Holmes asked this man to borrow his shovel to, quote, dig a hole in his cellar. This man just assumed it was for potatoes and said, okay. The next day, Holmes returned the shovel and left with this huge trunk, and the man never saw Holmes again. So this man called it in. They searched the cellar under this house, which unfortunately there had been a smell in there that was very bad, so the current tenants never went in the cellar, and it turned out because those girls' bodies were buried in that cellar. And when Holmes found out that the bodies of the girls were found, he was quoted saying,
"Well, I guess they'll hang me for this."
And then not long after that, once again through some incredible police work, he found out that an Indianapolis repair shop said that Holmes came in on October 3rd, 1894, with 2 cases of surgical instruments to be sharpened and then picked them up 3 days later. Later, they found the house that Holmes had rented, and they opened the base of the flue, and they found human teeth, fragment of a jawbone, and organs not totally burned. And unfortunately, but also fortunately, that was the body of Howard Peitzel. Once these were discovered, then the castle Holmes created was searched, and all of its secrets were revealed. The eeriest phase of the investigation began when the police, holding their flickering lanterns high, entered the hotel basement, a cavern of brick and timber measuring 50 by 165 feet. The discoveries came quickly. A vat of acid with 8 ribs and part of a skull settled at the bottom, mounds of quicklime, a large kiln, a dissection table stained with what seemed to be blood. They found surgical tools and charred high-heeled shoes. And more bones. 18 ribs from the torso of a child, small vertebrae, a bone from a foot, 1 shoulder blade, 1 hip socket. Articles of clothing emerged from walls and from pits of ash and quicklime, including a girl's dress and blood-stained overalls. Human hair clotted a stovepipe. They also found a letter that was written from Holmes to the pharmacist of the drugstore that said,
"Do you ever see anything of the ghost of the Williams sisters, and do they trouble you much now?"
Damn.
Woo!
He's talking about ghosts.
Yikes.
Then Charles Chappell came forward and told them about the skeletons. Charles Chappell hadn't done anything illegal in articulating these skeletons, but Holmes was doing some illegal activity, as always. And it wasn't long later, actually, it was on Thursday, August 19th, that the castle burned down. The castle, there was talks of turning it into a museum, into this house of horrors that it was, and when it burned down, no arrests were made. I think everyone felt like it was the right thing to do for that place to no longer exist.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the Peitzel family, he did succeed in killing 4 of the family members, but thankfully he did not get Carrie, the mother of the family, and he did not get the oldest and youngest children. However, it seems like that was exactly what he was intending to do. And really, from the very beginning, he always had these sinister ideas about Ben and his family as well. Ben was really just a person that he was a tool, not because he was a dickhead. Because, I mean, maybe Ben was a dickhead, we don't know. I hope not. But more so in a tool, like he was using him. And as soon as he wasn't useful to him anymore, he needed to get rid of him. Ben was an alcoholic. Ben and Holmes were heard fighting in the castle by residents or guests. It was just time for him to go. But even though he had just recently killed him, he had been feeling this way for a while.
It will be understood that from the first hour of our acquaintance, even before I knew he had a family, who would later afford me additional victims for the gratification of my bloodthirstiness, I intended to kill him.
So your classic bad guy shit.
Oh, yeah.
Really peak that. When it came time for the trial, Holmes decided to act as his own lawyer once again.
Wow.
Ted Bundy coming up again. And he didn't act as that way for a while. Quickly, he realized he got in over his head. Georgiana, his most recent wife, testified against him, while Esmeralda, his wife that was living in Wilmette, she testified as a character witness in support of Holmes.
Wow.
Carrie Peitzel had to testify and couldn't look at him until she absolutely had to identify him. She started crying so much when she saw the letters that were written to her by her children that she never got, that it was said that literally the entire courtroom was crying. Every single person there was so moved by this, except Holmes, who was just sitting there doodling. Carrie said that she had only met Holmes one time prior to this whole thing that was going on. When she first heard about Holmes, she really, really didn't like him and had a bad feeling and begged her husband Ben to not have anything to do with him. But as time went on, she just fell under his spell.
Wow.
Lots of people felt that way about him and really felt like he was able to get people to do things that they would not necessarily do. But his guilty verdict came in after only 3 hours of deliberation. On the day of his execution, he actually said that he was innocent of everything except for the botched operations of Julia Connor and Emmeline Sigrand. He said that he accidentally botched those abortions that he gave them. But other than that, he was completely innocent. However, while he was in jail, he wrote a confession and a memoir admitting and confessing to a lot more crimes than that. That is confusing though, because there are some murders that he said he committed where we know those people actually were living at the time, they had survived, so we're not sure exactly how many people he killed, but as we know, he definitely killed people. He killed at least 9 that is the minimum number that people think. But he was hanged on May 7th, 1896. And ironically, H.H. Holmes did not want to be dissected or exhumed or anything like that when he died. He had a huge fear about it. He knew that a lot of people were going to want to study his brain, and he didn't want anyone to look at his brain, which is such a shame because I'm sure we could have learned so much from it. So he actually requested to be buried within concrete, and they actually did that for him. He was buried within concrete in his coffin, and there is 10 feet of concrete buried above him so that he cannot get the same treatment that he gave so many others. As we said, I mean, this H.H. Holmes is a fascinating man. He's often called America's first serial killer.
Right.
So we do know so much about him, but it's, you know, it's just, there's only so much that we can know. There is a lot of things that we're not going to know. For example, we don't really know for sure if he ever really ran this hotel.
Right.
We don't know if he just used it as a front to kind of be able to buy items in bulk and be able to sell those off, or if it was a way just to get a few people in to kill them when he really felt like he wanted to. That stuff we don't really know for sure.
Right.
It's thought it could be anywhere up to 200 people that he killed. It's plausible. I think a reasonable guess would be 100 people, but it could have been just those 9 people as well. Some people really, really claim that he really was just killing the people that he felt like were getting in his way. I personally don't feel like that. I feel like there, especially because of all of in the house, there were so many different rooms where there were chutes where you could, that were greased, where you could put bodies could go straight down to the basement. There were soundproof rooms. There were peepholes into every single room, I believe.
Yep.
There's just so much to it that I think he had to enjoy it. Whether or not it was sexual, I don't really know.
Right.
But this is just one of those. It is fascinating. He is a fascinating man. Whatever he did do, whatever he didn't do, fascinating. And kind of like we said before about how he is so evil. He actually wrote a little something that showed that maybe the devil was on his mind.
I am convinced that since my imprisonment, I have changed woefully and gruesomely from what I was formerly in feature and figure. My head and face are gradually assuming an elongated shape. I believe fully that I am growing to resemble the devil, that the similitude is almost complete.
Now, no jailers, no warden, no superintendent. No one confirmed what he has written here. However, there were some things that occurred that may make you think otherwise.
Okay.
After the case, Detective Frank became seriously ill. The warden of the prison committed suicide. The jury foreman was electrocuted in a freak accident. The priest who gave Holmes his last rites was found dead in the church of mysterious causes.
What?
Emmeline Sigrand, one of his girlfriends, her dad was horribly burned in a boiler explosion, and a fire destroyed the district attorney's office, leaving only a picture of Holmes unscathed.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
Horrifying.
I mean, what is going on?
Terrifying.
You guys, please let us know. What do you think? Who do you think Holmes really was, or Herman Webster Mudgett? What do you think his real motives were? What do you think he really wanted? Let us know what you think. Please let us know on social media. DM us, email us at creepstreetpodcast@gmail.com. Also, I forgot, as I always tend to do, at the beginning of the episode to say my sources.
Go right ahead.
My main source for this episode was the amazing book, The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. I highly recommend it. It's kind of like how we were saying before, how H.H. Holmes is the Mac Daddy of serial killers. You know, Devil in the White City is kind of the Mac Daddy of true crime books.
It's incredible.
It's a great one. Another source was the H.H. Holmes documentary. It is on Amazon Prime, and also a great YouTube series on H.H. Holmes by the lovely Stephanie Harlow. I recommend you check out her videos just in general, but her H.H. Holmes was also great. There are so many more succulent, nasty, gossipy details, I mean, about H.H. Holmes that you guys just got to know about. I mean, he was a scammer. He was a scammer from day one, guys, and he was till the day he died.
Citizens of the Milky Way, that is going to wrap it up for H.H. Holmes. Maureen, thank you you worked your butt off for this. Thank you so much.
It is my pleasure. It was such a blast. Thank you guys for joining us. Come back. And thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell a friend, like, rate, subscribe, and thank you for listening.
Yeah. If you want to support this show, go to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast. My name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.